think so.
Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Garrett, Director for your Marshall Chamber, and we appreciate everybody coming here today to listen to Representative Swedzinski and Senator Dames' post-wrap session. A lot of things got done, a little overtime needed, but it appears that a lot of things got done, and we're excited to hear what they all have to say. I'm not going to take any more time, so I know they usually take a full hour. So with that, I'll Senator Dames and Representative Swedzinski.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Brad. We appreciate the Chamber hosting this. Thank you. And appreciate City Hall allowing us to use the facilities. We do appreciate that. This is the 14th Town Hall meeting that we'll have held in Marshall. So we always appreciate the opportunity to be here, discuss the issues prior to the session, and then kind of discuss the outcome of the session at the end. So we've made that kind of a policy, so we'll continue to do that. But again, welcome today. We do appreciate your being here. I'm Senator Gary Dames, and just wanted to kind of kick it off, and then I'll turn it over to Representative Swedzinski, and then we'll open it up for questions. A couple of things we did different this session is we started our session out and we set our dates for our bills to have their final hearings about 30 days early. The reason we did that is we felt that we could move the process quicker, so that when we got to the end, we would have more time to negotiate, more times to get the bills put together, and more time to negotiate and compromise with the governor to bring bills forward in a timely fashion. As things played out, we did get our bills done 30 days early. We came back from the Easter break. We moved those bills forward, went into conference committee, and the governor had asked to have the bills sent over prior to negotiating. He would like to look at them, and felt that way he could veto the bills and send them back, and that was his option. So we started that process, but we could tell early on that we needed to do a lot of work on those. We needed to sit down with the governor and get these things negotiated out. So about halfway through that process, we went to negotiating the bills. The governor did agree to negotiate them out before we went forth with the bills. So every bill that we had, the governor did sign every bill. There was contention on a couple of bills, but every bill that was signed, the governor had pre-agreed to, and the governor had plenty of time to see what was in the bills. So the bills were pre-agreed to, were signed, and then at the end, the governor decided that he would line item veto the money to operate the legislative body. Since that has happened, first of all, there will be no state shutdown because all the budget bills are passed, everything is in order, and everything will be moving forward. I do not see a special session. Everything that was in those bills was agreed to. It was compromised. There's a lot of things in those bills I did not like. There were things in those bills the governor did not like. We sat down across the table, we worked it out, and that's compromise. And right now, I think the governor's probably got compromise remorse, and that's the way the process is going to be. We did have what I felt some very good legislation this year. We had a really strong bonding bill this year. A lot of it was for state infrastructure, state facilities. That bonding bill, the last time we had a bonding bill was 3 years ago. We had a pretty good tax bill this year. That tax bill, I think it's been 3 years since we had a tax bill. I feel we had a very strong transportation bill. This is the first time we've had a transportation bill of any significance since 2008. We did have a good education bill. We did spend more money than I would like to have seen spent, but that's part of compromise. We put about $1.3 billion new money in education. We put $2.1 billion new dollars into health and human services. We did increase the county program aid, and we increased that enough in order to make the formula work. The county program aid formula has gotten pretty distorted because in rural Minnesota, especially out in southwest Minnesota, we have found that a lot of the dollars that are coming out to program aid are not getting out to western Minnesota. The problem with that is because the ag values are so high that we're not getting much of that money. So the Association of Minnesota Counties, all 87 counties agreed they would like to redo the formula, but they needed about $26.5 million to do that. We did put $26.5 million into long-term funding in order to make that happen. So that has been done. There was some additional dollars to LGA. With that, I'll turn it over to Chris, and then Chris can make some comments, and we'll open up for questions.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, too, for coming and joining us this morning. It looks like there's some coffee. I wish I'd have gotten here a little earlier for that. But no, we across the board really felt really pretty good about this session. Obviously, there is, as Gary mentioned, areas that we wish things would have been different, specifically within the environment area. We really felt we had a lot of strong bills moving forward when it came to cities, especially with some of the permitting reform and some of the environmental reform when it comes to wastewater treatment. And the costs that are being burdened by local taxpayers on some of those things being moved forward through the MPCA and DNR. We'll kind of get to some of the tax stuff a little more specifically. Some of the big areas are particular ag property tax. Gary touched on that county program aid, LGA, $15 million for local governments. In the tax area for when it comes to school bond referendums, we were able to move forward the bills that will help alleviate some on the building projects, up to 40% on ag property in that lien against it. So that will really help with property owners who feel that when times are tough here in ag land, they're getting a pretty big push when it comes to those new construction projects. One of the largest road construction bills I think have been passed in a very long time for road bridges. A lot of money getting put into corridors of commerce, which is a big fund that's been helping with the passing lanes on Highway 23 and other parts of the state as well. Feel pretty good about kind of the shape that's going to be putting our state in when it comes to future road construction projects. I think $15 million into small cities. I think in the past we've put new money up to 12, so we've been able to increase that. Would obviously like that to be higher, but that really gets after doing small projects within small cities. When you look at the funding formula from the gas tax, any city below 5,000 doesn't really equate to that. They don't have a piece of that pie, so setting aside specific dollars for small cities as an important part of the transportation plan. Higher education, we put over $200 million into that. To kind of hold steady, or at least try to cover some of the inflationary costs on our university campuses, which has been an growing piece of that for the bonding bill, also HEAPR funds, but also sewer and water. So we had a bill that almost made it through. It was up to $42 million that one of some of the areas that we wish for sales tax. So when a city goes out and builds a water treatment plant, because of lump sum contracts, it's that contract that gets signed when the contractor is out doing actually the purchasing of the materials. Cities themselves are tax exempt. But to make that actually work in the real world, that was one of the things that fell away. So those are some of the priorities we have moving forward. If we are to have some sort of a supplemental, would like to move some things like that forward to really ease the burden on local taxpayers when they're doing those major construction projects throughout the state. We've got a whole lot of things to talk about. I'd rather talk about what you want to talk about. So with that, we'll just pop it open and go from there. So if you don't raise your hand, we're just going to have coffee and donuts. So there you go.
Yes, Greg.
When you're talking about the transportation, I understand the lump sum, but I guess what I'd like to know is so how much of that money refers if it's actually back to outstate. So when you get a bonding bill, how much are we, Lyon County, Lincoln County,
Sure.
Redwood, what does that actually account to? Because $300 million looks good, but if we only get $400,000,
Sure.
it don't equate to very much good stuff.
Well, for the bonding bill, just specific projects. So when you talk about Lyon County or just within Senate District 16, I don't know the B side as well, but just from the water and sewer side, we had the city of Minneota who just went through a major water project. Because they kept it open, one of the pieces, even just from a not necessarily money standpoint, but from a language standpoint, is because the fubbub that happened last session with the bonding bill towards the end over in the Senate, they had some projects that had moved forward, and that's going to save the city of Minneota just $400,000 on that project alone. 1.95 million for the city of Granite with the Pioneer Public Television. So the Fagan family, or the Fagan Foundation, built that new facility right on Highway 23, donated that to the Pioneer Public Television system, and our bill moved forward. It had to be a cash portion, which actually filled the building with with equipment. And so, you know, from a match standpoint, I think that was a 5-to-1 locally raised match to what the state actually participated, which is unprecedented, the amount of local effort that went forward with that. I think AURI here in Marshall, for the program there at the college for, I think, some upgraded equipment, I think it was $275,000 or something like that. Yeah, you bet. And I'm trying to think of other projects there, Gary, but I think maybe it was more
Well,
transportation related. but, yeah.
Transportation-wise, I can't give you a breakdown county by county, but we have found in the past that the Quarters of Commerce has been very friendly to rural Minnesota, and so there's several $1 million put into Quarters of Commerce. Quarters of Commerce would be a grant program, and so it would be too early for us to know how those dollars were going to be distributed, but in the past, it's been very favorable to rural Minnesota. Another thing that we have done that will help rural Minnesota when it comes to transportation is currently bridges, no matter what size they are, come out of the transportation funding. What we did this year is any bridge over $7 million will no longer come out of this transportation funding account. It'll come strictly and directly from bonding. So that's going to make a big difference. You have the Kellogg Bridge, which is, I think, $100 and some million. I don't know if that number's exact number, but it's very, very expensive. Well, you take one bridge at that amount, and it really eats up a lot of those resources. So those bridges now will come out of bonding, and the smaller bridge projects will come out of the Roads and Bridges Fund, which is very favorable to rural Minnesota because we have a lot of smaller bridge projects, and that money will be there to go further. We also put $16 million into local roads for communities under 5,000. We started that process, I think it was 2 sessions ago, we started with $5 million, now we're up to $16 million. And same way with townships, and I don't have the exact number, but we did increase the number of dollars to go to township roads, which in the past we had not designated. So it's getting to be a stronger bill. As time goes on, I think we get a better share of the money out here, but the Department of Transportation will also have they'll have some input in that process too. So I can't give you the exact dollars, but I do think it's favorable to rural Minnesota from in the past. David?
Follow on to Greg's question. I read something just yesterday, a claim by at least one Greater Minnesota legislator that the Quarters of Commerce language included a provision that he thought would make it more difficult for Greater Minnesota projects to qualify under that program. Have you all heard anything about that discussion?
And I think you had mentioned that to me the other day in Redwood, and I'm not familiar with that clause. I'm not aware that that's in there. Like I say, Quarters of Commerce has always been very, very favorable to rural Minnesota, so I'm not familiar with that clause.
You know, and I think, you know, our earlier transportation bills had very specific language for specific projects, very, you know, earmarking, so to speak. And we kind of got away from that with the final bill. It would have been my hope we could have kept a lot of those things in, but, you know, from a management standpoint, we, want to have some projects get done that's been on the docket for a very long time, but we also want to give MnDOT, you know, they understand what needs to get done out in the countryside too. And yeah. Next question.
Other questions?
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Gary?
Could you, on this 40% reduction on the
Yep.
property tax for agriculture, are we going to see that right away, or is that for future building, or how's that going to work? Could you just touch on that?
Yes,
Sure.
it will go into effect for tax year 2018, which I believe is payable in 2019. And how that'll work is if you have a cost on your tax bill for a capital improvement in your local school district, it don't make any difference what year it was put into effect.
10 years or whatever.
If it's still being charged for, the state will pay 40% of that. That 40% will come out of the general fund, so that we're not spreading it out over the business community, over the homeowners. We looked at this process for the last 3 years and really couldn't come up with a good way to do it, other than taking it out of the general fund, and the Metro legislators were willing to do that. So it was in the bill last year, it's in the bill this year. So the counties will bill you the 60%, and then we will pay the counties annually or every tax collection period, we will pay them that 40% direct. So it could be one that started 10 years ago, it could be one that starts next year, that's the process.
So if there is a new school building or expansion, why then that would be worked the same way then?
Correct.
The general fund would kick in 40%.
Correct, yes. Strictly of the capital improvement referendum cost on your taxes. Not, some people think it's 40% of their entire tax bill.
Right.
That's not correct. It's
No,
just
I
strictly that piece.
understand that, and I want
Yeah.
to make sure you clarified that.
Yes,
Sure.
yep. Other questions? Yes.
Talk about what in the tax bill, the automatic inflator was removed, and also the first $100,000 of
I'll
your
take it.
annual
Yep.
tax levy is
Yes.
also reduced too. So can you just talk about that, what difference that will make for businesses?
Well, yeah, so with Brad's question or comment, really, that was, so we talked about kind of what's done for the rural countryside, but also what's done in the city, and the statewide business property tax, so any small business owner that owns or larger business owner knows that, we pay a property tax portion that goes from a commercial, industrial, or cabin would go from the local area up to the state. And so what we did was eliminate the bottom 100,000. So essentially freeing, so if you've got a building that's worth $150,000 and you're paying a statewide business property on that full $150,000, we simply eliminate the bottom 100,000 of that liability. So you're only really having to pay the current taxable amount of the statewide business property tax on that $50,000 that's left over. And so you're essentially eliminating from the bottom side up, moving up, so you can really push that property tax relief down to most any business owner, especially folks on the main streets where, if you've got a business worth maybe $400,000, your liability might be about $4,000 to the state. Approximately you'll get back, your reduction in your tax will be at $1,000, $1,500. And so, those are some of the things in the inflator. Was there's just an automatic inflator every year, and that was eliminated. So it's now been kind of locked in. So you're not going to see a constant change in, so say your building didn't really change in value, but the tax inflation formula did, you'd see an increase in your taxes automatically, and we simply got rid of that. So.
Other questions?
Steve?
Yes.
There's a lot of controversy or questions on this buffer law.
Yes. Yep.
Can you guys give us an update? It's changed almost every day. We hear different changes in the legislature.
Sure.
Yep.
If you don't mind touching on it, that'd be great.
Sure.
Well,
Go ahead,
we
Gary.
have, there was one change in the 2017 requirement. That has been extended out approximately 8 months. And then if you are in the process and have a plan in place, then you've got some more extension to that. We wanted to bring them both into the same year and then move that year. We were unable to get that done. We did get an extension for the first leg. The other thing, so there was an extension on that. The other thing is that there's another alternative practice that was added, so I think we're up to 7 alternative practices now. And then also the funding for it, there's $22 million from the Clean Water Fund went into the fund for the soil and water conservation districts in order to help do the design, the plans and that. There's also $8 million for sure going, I think there's 2 different pots of money going to the counties or to the people that are going to manage that process. And again, we'd certainly, if the counties have not agreed to do it, we'd certainly encourage the counties to do it, because that's the best place it's going to get done to have local control. And there will be some money for that. I think it's 14 million total, but I know there's 8 million for sure in one of the bills. The other thing is that they did release, not too long ago, they released a whole new list of exempted private ditches, and those appeals can still be done on some of these private ditches, so counties are still sending in those appeals and working that process through. Another big concern, of course, is the seed that we have, pure seed. There's a lot of issue with Palmer Amaranth, and we're very concerned about bringing that in, and that's a very tough process. Once that starts and spreads into the ag community, that's going to be very tough. So we're trying to make sure that we have high-quality seed coming in that is certified and pure.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the update on it. There was, a lot of talk of maybe that it would be appealed, but that's not going to happen. Governor Dayton, that's one of his one of his legacies, and that was started a couple of years, 3 years ago. When he originally came out, he wanted to have 50 foot, and now it's 50 foot on lakes and streams. On public waters, it's 16 and a half foot on public ditches, so.
And so I mean, continually, this is still, I just visited with the folks over in Lincoln County, and they said they've got approximately of the 356 properties that are affected by the 50-foot buffer, exactly 0 of them are even looking. I mean, you know, that's the issue that we have. We keep hearing this story that, well, it's already 70–80% in compliance. Well, that's the ditches that are on the public waters that were maybe already had a 16.5 foot. The big issue is that 50 foot, and it still is a big issue. And you know, the alternative practice, I think, will let some pressure off where you know, if the dirt is actually sloping up towards the ditch, maybe that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have 50 feet there. And so we're really working, and the reason why the timelines were able to change a bit, even though it really still puts it within Governor Dayton's administration. And so that will be a conversation with whoever that might be to replace Governor Dayton, that this is going to continually be a discussion that we need to have, because you know, there is still some issues of lacking compensation and the rest. So, go
Yes,
ahead.
sir.
How many years is there to be money funded to the soil and water in the county for doing this? Is
Well-
it just a 1 year or 2 year deal, or what is it?
Well, this would be a 2-year, you allocate for a biennium, and this would be a 2-year allocation. And technically, if you look at the bill in 2 years, the process would be in place as far as the buffers. They're supposed to be in place in 17 and 18, now in 18. So they would be in place pretty much by the end of this 2-year biennium. So the need for the planning and stuff would not be there, but there would be more need for the implementation at the county level, and we're assuming we will continue funding with that.
So if there's lawsuits come upon this because of this, and I bet there will be, is the state gonna stand behind that, or is the county responsible for that?
And I can't answer that. We have, I'm not aware of, I know that there's people talking to lawsuits. I'm not aware of the lawsuits that are actually happening yet. I don't know just how that's all gonna play out. One of the issues is that this has been the one on private ditches, the public ditches has been in statute since 1978. And that was based on redetermination. Once the ditch was redetermined, then the assessments changed considerably, and the landowner that had the ditch was paid for a 16.5-foot buffer strip out of those assessments at the appraised agricultural value price for the land. And then also that pot of money was used to maintain those ditches. And as those ditches were redetermined, that was happening. And what this law does is kind of preempted that and put the 16.5-foot in earlier. And so the law still reads, and it's defined in the buffer strip law, that when a ditch is redetermined, that the county will still pay like they had in the past. And it's also defined in that bill that that payment will be based on agricultural productivity land, not grassland, because once you put it into the buffer strips, then that could be changed to a grassland classification. The county would still be obligated to pay it at the agricultural production classification through those assessments. So the payment part of it will come when the counties do the redetermination. But the management part of it, that's where the funding will have to continue to do that, because that'll be an ongoing thing for whoever takes that responsibility, be it the county. If the county does not take it, it'll automatically revert to Bowser, Board of Soil and Water Resources. And I don't think, I mean, that's not where we want to be going. We would rather have that local control.
You know, and I think your question kind of came along the lines of who will be backing it up from a lawsuit standpoint. You know, the county attorney, or the attorney general and the state auditor. I mean, you saw what kind of how she treated the counties when it came to the auditing process, when we were able to relieve counties of the mandate to use that office, particularly at the state level. They took you guys to court. So, you know, it's my guess is that's what the state would land is in that area in deference with the administration. But yeah.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
One other comment on that is that if you look at the topographical map, of the, the Great Minnesota Divide of Buffalo Ridge, and then you have the Minnesota River and all the tributaries that go into that. And you move that 16 and a half to 50 feet, and the number of acres that is.
That's
No,
big.
it's
It
tremendous.
is tremendous.
Yeah, no, it's-
And the implementation and mechanics of that whole bill, I mean, you can call it a land grab, or you can call it whatever you want, but it is mind-boggling.
Far, far more reaching than what people have, than what anybody even envisions.
Right.
It's thousands and thousands of acres, and now in rural Minnesota, in southwest Minnesota, that's a big issue because of productivity of our land. You get north of Highway 10 and things change a little bit with that productivity up there, but it is a big issue, and it's a lot of acres being taken out. And considering the fact by 2050, we have to double the amount of food we're producing, and then you start taking out those, and there's no way of creating new land. I mean, most countries have their land into production. We're at max production as far as land. There's no more new land. We're losing land every day to urban sprawl. And so in order to do this, you have to rely on new technology, and we certainly don't need to be taking thousands and thousands of acres out of production, but that's where it's at. Yep.
And one other comment is that, the soil conservation figures 16 and a half feet, if it's done correctly, is enough to clean the water and do the job. So that's a question of need.
Well, I think that's where if you look at the handbook for this alternative practice, it does potentially lend itself that it could even be less than 16 and a half feet. So, that's our hope, that when the counties implement it and they work with it, that they recognize those alternative practices, that, there are going to be areas that maybe 5 foot, quite frankly, is going to do the job because of the top, the way things are going. So it's having that flexibility, I think, is going to help. I hope.
Unfortunately,
So.
it's another program where the state looked at one size fits all. And that's not the case. I mean, we have some out there that, like Chris referred to, 2 to 3 to 5 feet. And some may need to be 16 feet, but we should have done them on a ditch by ditch basis. I mean, it's pretty hard for water to run uphill. And so you still may need to do something to keep the dirt from being rolled over into the ditch, and something to keep the ditch, the crown, from slumping. But do we need 16 and a half feet all over? I think it should have been done more on a case-by-case basis, determining what that size would be. The 16 and a half feet, from what I understand, in the statute in 1978 was put into place in order to have an option for the folks to get in and clean the ditches and stuff like that, which is totally different than what we're trying to do today with it. Today we're saying that that's going to help clean water up, and maybe that's the case, but is a 16 and a half foot always the right one? I don't believe that it is. Yep. Other questions?
Go ahead.
Chris, you mentioned the sales tax refundability effort that wound up on the cutting room floor at the end. And then you mentioned something about a supplemental.
Sure.
What were you thinking?
Well, just, obviously we have, we'll have there's potential there'll be a surplus. I mean, we don't know if there'll be a surplus or anything next year, if there'll be extra dollars to work with. And it's just my hope that if we're going to be doing something next year, I mean, it's more of a policy year next year. But there's always funds, it seems like, to deal with. So if we are, it would be my hope that could be part of that conversation.
Thank you to both for
Yep.
being involved in supporting that the last 2 sessions. And it sounds like you'd be willing to support it next
Oh, yeah.
session
Oh, yeah.
again if we bring it forward.
It's like so many things, sometimes it takes 5-6 years and 5-6 shots to get it through, but we will continue. We got closer this year than we have been in the past. It took longer to get the cutting floor, so eventually it'll stay on top of the table. Yep. Other questions?
Go ahead, Al.
You passed a budget bill that was supposedly negotiated with both sides.
Yes.
And then at the last minute, you put that brilliant, as one person in your caucus called it, poison pill in to force the governor to sign it. Is this going to become the new norm and the gotcha thing, or are we not trusting each other anymore, or what's going on?
Well, first of all, that's not what happened. It did not get put in the last minute.
Okay.
And I don't care what the governor says, it did not get put in the last minute. It was in that bill for some time. And these bills were gone through with the governor and/or his staff. And so how they can say now that they did not know that they can say whatever they want to say, I'm going to tell you, that did not come in the dark of the night. It's not something that just happened to drop in the bill the last couple hours. That was in the bill for some time. So I'll leave the governor to decide how he wants to handle it. We'll decide, I guess, how we're going to have to handle it. But if you want to call, if you're asking if that's the new norm, you'd have to ask the governor if that's going to be his new norm. We had it in the bill, it was in the bill, and so that's all I can comment on.
So it was in the bill all along that if he didn't sign it, Department of Revenue would be defunded?
That was in the bill for some time in
Yeah.
the state government bill, yes. That was in that bill for some time. I'm not going to get into what the comments were because I might miss an A or a C or something like that, but I know the comment that was made by the office in relationship to that piece of language. So I'm going to leave it at that. We have chosen, last Friday, we chose to hire an attorney firm because basically it's our belief that one branch cannot do away with another branch of government. So we'll see where that goes. It would be kind of interesting if this plays out and the courts would decide that the governor has the option to line item veto the legislative body, because that would get very interesting. So now we have a new election, and let's say that don't make any difference which party, if a Democrat or Republican is the new governor. And in the 2020 election, the other party holds the House and the Senate. Why would the governor just not say, I'm going to defund these folks, and I'll do everything with executive order? We can't one body cannot eliminate another body.
No, I'm just
So-
saying, I mean, I wish we could get to the point where we don't have to threaten each other.
Yeah.
That we should be doing, you know, we have a need for high-speed broadband out here, and we heard almost nothing about that during the whole session.
Oh, sure. Well, we put $20 million into high-speed broadband, and you know, I think we did 35 the last time, so another 35. I think one of the grants that was given during the last go-around was between here and Canby, and I'm not exactly sure what that project does. I think maybe $2 million worth of that funding came to that to just on Highway 68. And the other area is 5G, so the implementation of the 5G network when it comes to your mobile devices. So what's happening, because the state of Minnesota is going to be hosting the Super Bowl, is all the companies that are, Verizon, AT&T are going to be, pushing to really upgrade the service here as part of their marketing program for across the country. We were probably number 34 on the list when it came to the upgrade. This is going to be primarily more of a metro-centric and maybe some rural cities, but they have essentially a small cell technology, which currently they've got, if you think of it kind of as a repeater system where for the 4G system we have these really tall towers, maybe on top of water plants and the rest, and the move is going to be going to individual poles, so just a utility pole along the roadway. Nationally, I think the reimbursement is going to be around $13 per pole. When it comes to, but in the state of Minnesota, we were able to negotiate for local utilities and for the local cities, I think it's $125 per pole with a $25 service charge. And that will help develop that investment throughout the state and putting us on the cutting edge because of the Super Bowl and those investments. So, having your device at 5G, I think they say you can download an hour-and-a-half movie in 2 seconds to your device. And so, those are all investments that we want to encourage from a state perspective, but also give some certainty to the industry across the state, because there were some cities that had put in place over $7,000 or $8,000 per pole of a cost. And obviously that's not going to encourage development. But also we want to treat local taxpayers and local utilities with respect to an extent to help move that forward. So.
But you mentioned, Al, you didn't hear anything about broadband. There's a lot of things that the public probably didn't hear a lot about. This was probably one of the quieter sessions as far as you didn't hear a lot. I mean, there was no big blow-ups between the House and the Senate, no big blow-ups between the House and the Senate and the governor's office. Quite frankly, this is why what happened at the end really surprised me, because this has probably been, in the 7 sessions I've been there, by far the session that we've gotten the governor's office involved the most. Their staff was very helpful this year, very involved. The governor was involved much more than in the past. The bills were all gone through, so everybody knew what was in the bills. Everybody knew what they were agreeing to. There was a lot of compromise, quite frankly. There's a lot of things I did not like that we compromised, but in order to get some of the other stuff, that was the process, and that's the political process, is supposed to be compromise. And so I thought we did a really good job of that this year, and it's surprising the number of media that have said, you know, this was probably one of the quieter sessions they've seen in many years because of the fact that a lot of this stuff was being worked out as we went. So there's a lot of things that probably didn't get real billings because there wasn't a big argument about it. There wasn't a big argument about what we were going to do with broadband. We knew we needed to do something. We couldn't probably get the dollars that a lot of people have liked, but still we did get, as Chris referred to, $20 million. And I think they figure about $30 million is about the max that you can use efficiently. So we got 2/3 of that. But it was a quiet, from that standpoint, it's kind of a quiet session, yeah. Yep. Yes, sir.
Paul?
Mine is more of a thank you, just for the meal seed funding within the Ag Bond. That was $2 million that goes to colleges that support farm business management and agricultural education. Greatly appreciate that for the farmers in our area that are going through financial situations right now. That'll tremendously help them out. Also with funding for the RFA program for in the beginning farmers for that tax credit on that. Again, I think that'll allow for the farming to continue into the future and to be transitioned to that next generation. So thank you very much for your support on those. Also from a higher ed standpoint with the career and tech ed academies with the schools, I think that's going to be tremendous for building our workforce in our southwestern Minnesota and rural America, or rural Minnesota especially. And then also for funding for our rural colleges to help keep them going strong. Yep. And then switching hats on the farmer side, thank you for your support with the ditch mowing rules and everything else like that. And just appreciate all your support in the world of agriculture.
Yep.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Going back to the tax bill, was there another question
Yeah,
back there?
right back there. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
I just
sir.
have a small one. How
Yeah.
much do you think it's going to cost with taking Dayton to court over this at the end of the legislative session? Do you have an idea what it's going to cost taxpayers, anything like that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't have. I know that the company, the firm that we have hired has reduced their cost by 50%. But we really can't project that because we don't know at what stage this craziness will get taken care of. But it's a good question. Yep.
Our hope is that it just, yeah, at some point it's just, okay, maybe let's not go to court on this, and Dayton kind of sees the light on that. I mean, it just, yeah, I mean, when you look at it just from a, getting rid of, I mean, essentially that's what you're doing, is getting rid of the ability for one branch of government to actually function. Then it seems a little more serious than, oh, this is a tit for tat thing. I mean, that's literally what we're potentially facing. So I don't think the state would be well served by that, unless you want agency making all the rules. So which they're happy to do. So.
And it's the legislators could function. I mean, as
we can
Chris
do it.
and
We'll
I,
do
we
it.
can
Yeah, we'll do it.
continue to do our work even if we're not getting paid. But there's there's no partisan staff, so that Democrats nor Republicans, none of their staff would be there. Bigger than that, there'd be no nonpartisan staff.
That'd be a big deal.
So there'd be no staff. So you couldn't introduce a bill because you have to make sure that bill is drawn up and goes through the process correctly to meet the statutes and things like this. So it could be total chaos trying to pass legislation without that support staff to make sure that everything meets the guidelines and that we're not doing something that totally changes something over here that you're unaware of. And that's where our independent or a nonpartisan folks, that council, there's several attorneys, there's revisers, there's researchers, and that's what they do on a day-to-day basis, is make sure everything like that fits. So. Yep.
And it's just a knowledge base too from those nonpartisan staff folks that, they've been writing legislation and working with legislators for 20 or 30 years. And one of my questions I always come up, there's one of the first things I learned as a legislator, there's a big difference between an idea and a good idea. just because you have an idea doesn't make it a good idea. And, you know, how that, and nonpartisan staff are always the ones eloquently to let you down. So when you want to change something or you have this great idea, go upstairs on the 6th floor, say, hey, I've got this idea for a bill. And they say, well, and the knowledge base is really interesting. They'll say, well, you know, I think in '86 there was another legislator that worked on something like that, and I helped them write the, you know, it's like, wow, you know, so just kind of puts it in perspective of, you know, that we're just here for a little while, and some of those folks are there to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow. So, cool.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Senator, another question. I just wanted to piggyback on the comment that was made just a little bit earlier before you get back to the tax bill and talk about the real money because of the support in particular around current technical education. There will be $3 million coming to the region to help expand, in particular, high school programming in partnership with our post-secondary education institutions to provide opportunities. I think one of the things that's built into that bill that doesn't get talked about as much will be the need for business industry, public-private partnerships with that as we look at trying to expand those program opportunities in an effort to, again, increase the access to the talent that we need in order to fill the jobs that we have in the region. So again, thank you for your work with that. That's much appreciated.
And thank you for all the support and things that you've been a very good resource for Bill and I and Chris, and so we really do appreciate that. And you too, we appreciate the opportunity to have those resources to help us move this stuff along.
Sure.
Yep. Other questions, concerns, comments?
In the back.
I'd like to personally thank you both for your support of the aquaculture bill. I know, Chris, you really spearheaded the drive in the House to get that done. And to build that industry here in Minnesota, we've taken that first initial large step to do that. Not only what that means to Chew Shrimp, but also other businesses here in Marshall like BH Electronics and Action Track. To build that industry with that support is greatly appreciated. And just want to publicly thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to thank you both for your support of the construction truckway bill also. Like you mentioned, sometimes it takes a while. That was at least 4 years, and it's a good common sense bill, and some of that savings will come back to the cities and counties and MnDOT. So it's a good bill.
Yeah.
And as you referred to earlier, at the end of the day, it's going to be savings to MnDOT also. It's going to spread those erosion bridge funds. Yep. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the co-ops would like to thank you for your work on the local democracy bill this session.
Oh, yeah.
We like to see the local boards being involved in decision-making versus St. Paul. So thank you very much.
Yep, you bet. Yep. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Minnesota Auto Dealers introduced a franchise bill this year, passed the House almost unanimously. And Chris, I want to thank you for that. Senator Dames, you and your committee removed a lot of the equal pay for warranty and parts reimbursement on that bill. I'd just like to know why.
If you want to have that discussion in public here, I'm more than willing to have it, but I don't think that that's in anybody's best interest, Chet. You and I have had this conversation many times, and I don't think it's in your best interest to have this in this public setting. But if you would like to do that, you can tell me and we'll go ahead and do it. I don't believe that that's where this should be held.
I'd like to have it whether it's public or not.
Okay.
We can do it afterwards, that'd be great.
That's up to you. You make the decision. If you want to do it now, there's time. I don't think that's in your best interest. So I'll yield to what you want to do.
Appreciate you looking out for me.
Thank you. Next.
Another bill that kind of got on the radar, we appreciate, is the ADA lawsuit reform bill.
Yes.
That a lot of Marshall businesses are aware of. A couple years ago, a lot of lawsuits were made. Appreciate your support on that, getting it through this year.
Yeah. Well, that was more of a kind of a clarification this year, and seeing it come back. I sat on the conference committee for that that bill, and yeah, so it's a big issue. You know, it was interesting. Coming in front of the committee, you know, oftentimes the folks that are directly involved with one of the guys that was actually doing some of the lawsuits came before and just railed against the work we were doing. It was interesting, but yeah. It wasn't that Hansmeier himself, but it was one of the other guys. So.
And there was some tweaking to that again this year.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments, concerns? Just,
Sure.
yes?
Preemption bill. We talked about the preemption bill. It didn't get signed by the governor. Do you think that it'll come back in a future year, or do we have to wait for a new governor? Or talk about that?
Well, I think that's obviously a priority for folks to kind of have some market certainty across the state. I think visiting with a lot of local business owners that feel, how does that affect them when they have a tour bus that goes and the person spends a week up in the cities or does that throughout the year, and how they calculate that, and staying within labor laws. That's a big issue. I don't think that's an issue that's going to be going away, and maybe that means a new governor and how that perspective is, but we'll likely be seeing that issue again and how it affects. And it can go both ways, quite frankly. I think from a labor standard standpoint, one of the areas that it swings, from a local, whether that be a $15 minimum wage in Minneapolis, or that would be a right to work county. That can be both eyes of that perspective, that they can say, well, if you want to have $15, maybe we have a county that wants to get rid of, that moves forward a provision that says any contract signed within the county will be a right to work contract. And have a local ordinance in that direction. And maybe that's something somebody wants to take up here locally, but it might be a little interesting. But that's the perspective when you look at preemption, to say, what is the state policy on certain labor laws? Well, how does it affect it, and how do you navigate that from a business standpoint, especially if you're working not just in it's one thing if you just have a one shop and you're operating in one spot, but if you've got a business that is operating in multiple jurisdictions, and how that law affects you and keeps you out of trouble, and there's enough red tape out there already when it comes to regulation, and now you add another layer to that at the local level, it definitely doesn't create jobs. It does, but in government. So.
Well, another concern we really have on this is when you have one community determining a minimum wage and benefits and all of these things, and implement that upon the businesses. So now you have a community that does that, and that business decides to move out because of those new requirements. Chances are they're not going to move someplace else in Minnesota. Yeah. Now, it may impact that community, but it can also impact a lot of other communities that maybe are feeders for whatever that industry is building, making, or manufacturing. So that's from a state standpoint where we're really concerned about is getting all of these different rules and regulations for different communities that are far more reaching than just that local community. And so that's one of the real concerns we have as a state. I don't know how long it's going to take to settle it. I don't think it's going away because it is a major issue. And there was a lot of discussion on this issue through the process, and there was a lot of, at one point it looked like it may pass, another point it looked like it wouldn't pass. So it was one of those that there's a lot of different things going into it, but I think it's going to be back, certainly. Yeah. Yep.
Anything else? Well, we can maybe hang out for a few minutes afterwards, just mill around, but appreciate you folks coming out, appreciate your work and just your contact that you give us as legislators throughout the year. Obviously, we don't work within a vacuum. Our phones ring and our emails, and I think we've probably gotten an email from probably almost everyone here, or had a visit from everyone here throughout the session, and your civic engagement is exceptionally important. Obviously we've got some work to do next year as well, hopefully within the tax area and throughout state government when it comes to regulatory reform, when it comes to the state's perspective on local businesses and communities. And it's just an honor to serve you. Just appreciate that. And I think most everyone's getting their corn and wheat in the ground and beans, so I think it should be a good year as long as we get rain when we need it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, folks. We certainly appreciate it.